never thought I'd experience such sheer terror in my life. But that day, it all changed. It was the first day of school in the crisp, cool fall after a long, restful weekend. The leaves were turning vibrant shades of red and gold, and a sense of excitement filled the air as students and teachers gathered for the start of a new academic year. Little did I know that the memories I'd create that day would be ones I'd never want to remember. As the clock inched closer to 10 a.m., I was sitting in my first period class, trying to shake off the lethargy of the weekend. The hum of conversation filled the room as my classmates and I exchanged stories about our time away. It was supposed to be a day filled with anticipation and excitement, not the nightmare that unfolded. Suddenly, the tranquility of the moment was shattered by a deafening explosion, followed by the sound of rapid gunfire. Panic surged through the classroom like a tidal wave. My heart pounded in my chest as we all dove to the ground, seeking shelter behind desks and huddled against the walls. The terror was palpable in the eyes of my classmates, and our teacher desperately tried to maintain control. We could hear the chaotic sounds of screams and running footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. The nightmare had just begun. The pops of gunfire continued, one after another, like a malevolent symphony of destruction. I clutched my chest, trying to slow my racing heart. Fear coursed through my veins, and I felt a profound sense of helplessness as I realized the gravity of the situation. This was no fire drill. This was a nightmare come to life. Through the classroom window, I caught glimpses of terrified students fleeing for their lives, some falling and scrambling back up in their frantic escape. My mind couldn't comprehend the horror unfolding before my eyes. I wanted it to be a cruel prank or some twisted joke, but the reality was far more sinister. Minutes felt like hours as the gunfire continued unabated. I couldn't help but think of my younger sibling, who was in the lower grades of the school. My heart ached with worry for their safety. Were they trapped in this living nightmare too? I couldn't bear the thought. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the gunfire ceased. The silence that followed was eerie, as if the world held its breath. We strained to hear any sign of what was happening outside our classroom, every second feeling like an eternity. It wasn't long before we heard the authoritative voices of law enforcement approaching. The SWAT team had arrived, and the tension in the room escalated as they methodically cleared our classroom. We were instructed to stay low and remain as calm as possible. As we emerged from our hiding spots, I saw the aftermath of the horror that had unfolded. Bloodstains and shattered glass littered the once peaceful hallways, and the injured were being carefully tended to by paramedics. The sight was chilling, a stark reminder of the fragility of life. Relief washed over me as I reunited with my sibling, who was shaken but thankfully unharmed. The relief, however, was tinged with profound sadness for the many who were not as fortunate, as news reports later confirmed. 18 children were in hospitals with injuries of varying severity, several in serious condition. The attacker, a former student of our school, had been apprehended at the scene, surrendering with his hands raised. In the days and weeks that followed, the community tried to make sense of the senseless act of violence that had shaken us to our core. The first day of school, a symbol of fresh beginnings, had been marred by an unimaginable tragedy. We were left to grapple with the haunting memories, wondering how we could ever find closure in the wake of such horror. I had always thought that my job as a school security guard was pretty mundane. My routine consisted of patrolling the school buildings at night, making sure everything was secure, and locking up after hours. But one ordinary evening, as I was doing my rounds, something happened that shook me to my core and made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It was well past midnight when I first heard the strange sounds echoing through the darkened halls of the school. At first, I dismissed it as a mere product of my imagination, perhaps the wind playing tricks on me. But as the sounds grew louder and more distinct, I knew there was something amiss. I reached for my flashlight. its beam piercing through the inky blackness that enveloped the third floor of the school building. The source of the sound seemed to be coming from the administrative office. The office door was locked, but I had a set of keys that granted me access to all the rooms in the school. With a sense of unease gnawing at the pit of my stomach, I cautiously unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was dimly lit, and my flashlight revealed rows of empty desks and filing cabinets. There was no one in sight. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stood there, puzzled and on edge. Just when I was about to chalk it up to my imagination playing tricks on me, the chair in the far corner of the room suddenly moved, sliding across the floor as if pushed by an invisible force. My heart raced, and I could hardly believe my eyes. I knew there was something terribly wrong. Before I could react, I felt a chilling presence behind me, and a cold hand brushed against my shoulder. I spun around, my flashlight flickering wildly, but there was no one there. Panic surged through me, and I didn't waste a moment. I bolted out of the office, slamming the door behind me and locking it from the outside, my heart pounding like a drum. I retreated to the security room, hoping to find some answers through the surveillance cameras. As I watched the live feed, my blood ran cold. The chair in the office continued to move on its own, back and forth. The office door creaked open and then slammed shut repeatedly, as if some unseen entity was toying with it. I couldn't comprehend what I was witnessing. The rational part of my mind screamed that this couldn't be real, that there had to be some logical explanation. But deep down, I knew that I had encountered something beyond the realm of the ordinary, something supernatural. In that moment, I made a decision. I would never set foot in that school again. I didn't want to believe in the existence of entities and spirits, but now I had experienced it firsthand. There was something otherworldly hidden within those walls, something that defied all logic and reason. As I left the security room, my footsteps echoing loudly through the empty school, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden within the shadows of that place. I knew one thing for sure: I would never forget that night, and I would never be the same again. The world was far stranger and more mysterious than I had ever imagined, and I had glimpsed a reality that most people could only dream of or dread. This happened when I was 14 years old, just a sophomore in high school. I was hanging out with a couple of friends before school started, and we were just standing around, talking about dumb stuff that 14-year-olds do. Soon, the warning bell rang, and we had to go our separate ways to attend our classes. As I made my way to class, the school bell rang again. School was now starting, and I would be late, but I didn't think much of it and kept walking. The hallways were now empty, and the intercom came back on. There was an announcement that the school was going under a lockdown. I couldn't understand why. I was pretty confused. Everything seemed fine to me. I kept walking towards my classroom, thinking it might be a false alarm or a drill. When I entered the hallway where my classroom was located, I stopped and froze. At the far end of the hallway, there was a tall figure wearing a tattered black cloak and a grotesque mask. It took me a few seconds to process what was happening. The figure hadn't noticed me yet, but then it turned its head and looked in my direction. I quickly ducked back around the corner, my heart pounding in my chest, fear gripping me like a vice. The figure had been standing right where my classroom was, so I couldn't go there now. The hallways were completely empty, and I started to panic. I knew the school pretty well, as I had been there plenty of times prior to my sophomore year. So I went to the nearest place I knew, which was a nearby janitor's closet. I was hoping to stay safe in there until everything was over. I sat in the darkness, trying to listen for any sounds, praying that the masked figure wouldn't find me. During my time in there, I was terrified, and I didn't dare make a noise. I stayed in the closet, trying to calm myself down from hyperventilating for what felt like an eternity. It was completely quiet, and I couldn't hear much. But at one point, I did hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the empty hallway. I held my breath, my heart racing. I really didn't know who it was, but luckily, they moved past the closet and then things went back to being silent. I just hoped whoever that masked figure was, they would not enter the closet. I hadn't heard anything in the longest time, and my fear was overwhelming me. I thought it might be safer to get out of there. I cautiously stepped out of the closet, and when I did, I noticed the hallways were still empty and quiet. The lockdown was still in effect, and I had no idea what was happening. I started speed walking back towards my classroom, still careful, looking all around. I had made it about halfway back when I suddenly heard a noise that made me freeze. It was the sound of footsteps getting closer from the next hallway around the corner. My heart leaped into my throat, and I quickly turned around and went back down another hallway, trying to avoid whoever was coming my way. All I cared about was staying alive for myself. I kept on running, my lungs burning, my legs aching, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Eventually, I stopped, unable to hear the masked figure behind me anymore. I gathered myself, trying to catch my breath, and then started walking towards the exit, hoping to find a way out. When I reached the exit, relief flooded over me as I saw multiple police officers outside of the school. I ran for the door, and when they saw me, they waved me over. I was finally safe. The masked figure inside the school was later caught, but we never found out what their intentions were. It's been about 5 years now, and I'm way better. We returned to our normal routines at school shortly after, and our school had a police officer stationed there for the next year, which made everyone feel a lot safer. I was just happy that nobody got hurt and that I was able to make it out alive. I wouldn't wish that experience upon my worst enemy. The shadows of that terrifying day still loom in the corners of my mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that can unexpectedly invade our lives.